that person and trying to figure out how to help them. So, any questions, comments, or concerns about that part of it? We all good? All right. We got about 6-7 minutes before we're going to take our lunch break. So, you guys feel okay about how to score this now? All right. So let's talk about the data points. On the back of your thing, you've got the black and white version, but I'm going to give you a color version. It's your turn. You get to pass those out to everybody. So, as you saw me come over there and circle the 8, 9s, and 10s, you will see that I'm very clear about instructions because I forget stuff. So, any barrier, any importance of barrier score on person side is 8, 9, or 10, requires consideration for inclusion as a prevention item or something that needs to be added. That's just kind of a not negotiable, okay? If it's an 8, 9, or 10, it's a big freaking deal. And the reason we say it's a big deal is because we've seen too many times when people didn't pay attention to an 8 because it wasn't a 9 or a 10, and an 8 was as high as that person scored anything, which makes that 8 their 10. Does that make sense? We've got some people who are averse to either end of the spectrum, but it's only the high end of the spectrum that causes us problems at this point. Okay? So some people will never say a 10. They'll only say a 7 or an 8. Well, if all of their scores are 7s or 8s, that's their 9s and 10s, guys. Okay? So this assessment picks that up. And it makes the adjustment automatically because you're going to look at the ratios and you're going to look at the tension percentages, if you will. Okay? So that's part of the reason why, though. You want to pay attention to the 8s, the 9s, and the 10s. You're going to pay attention to the scores, the motivation, tension, resistance factor scores for the person as well as for the system. And the higher the number, the bigger the problem it is. You will see at the bottom of your color, on the back page, the second page of your color version is your color instructions. So, anything that's over 35 is, we should be talking about it. We should at least have a conversation about it. It requires a conversation. It may be, we're going to wrap this in with something else, because we're going to talk about consolidating efforts, because not every intervention has to be specific and distinct and unique to that need. You can do 2 or 3 things and accomplish one thing all at once. Like if somebody really wants to go out, they really want more social contact, and they want more romance, and they really like food, then how about a date? That covers 3 things. Does that make sense? Okay? So it's important that we at least are aware that this is a big enough number to require us to have a conversation about it. Okay? If it's over 49, this has to be addressed somewhere, whether it's in a person-centered plan or a crisis prevention plan or something along those lines. If it's over 49, we got to have something that we say we're doing about it. And the reality is that 7 times 7 is the only way you can get 49. So it tends to be a bigger deal. Okay? That means that I've perceived pretty significant barriers to a pretty important thing in my life. Okay? Now, that's as much out of anecdotal evidence and looking around and seeing what's going on. The over 63, here's the reality, is that the people who scored 63 and above were all A, already in crisis, or B, went into crisis shortly after we did these assessments. And so we basically started saying, 63 seems to be the magic trip number for some reason, okay? So if it's at 63 or above, that's a big deal. That 72 that we got over there, that's a big deal. Even though it's a makey-uppy situation, that's a big deal, okay? So that would be something we would have to be talking about. How are we going to address the fact that this person feels like they really want to be more independent, they want to be respected as an adult, they want to be able to make more decisions on their own, and they feel like there's just no way that's going to get to happen. And because that's what it's saying, because now what's going to happen, what happens when you feel like you're oppressed? You do one of 2 things. You give up and become depressed, right? You get hopeless and helpless, and you just kind of dissolve into the furniture, or you fight back. You become rebellious. Okay? So you've got two choices. I can force somebody into depression, or I can force them into a fight. Which one do you want? Okay? And then that's basically what it's come down to. Okay? So you've got the individual scores, you've got the motivation, tension, resistance factor scores, you've got the harmony, tension, and resistance ratio scores, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. Okay, so there's the rest of your instructions on how you do the harmony, tension, and resistance ratio. We did the division that we did over there. Now, if it is at or below 0.5, it requires immediate attention because it's a resistance number. Now, I wrote it in purple over there under, which should be in the blue for the tension. So the 2.4, that's a big number. That should be in blue, okay? 0.9 is almost a 1. That's not a high number on either one of them. And we don't really have a whole lot to indicate that this requires us to have a detailed conversation. It's an 8 in terms of it's very important, but I don't see that there's many barriers. That means that I'm probably pretty satisfied. 24 is below all the critical thresholds, so it's saying they're basically satisfied with helping others, and we think, and I think it's important in my life, but you guys are helping me get it, so it's okay. Does that make sense? But now over here, I think this is really, really, really important, and you guys don't get the fact that, yeah, you're kind of agreeing with me that how important it is, but you don't understand that I want a whole lot more of this a whole lot more often. I think there's all kinds of barriers in the way, and you guys don't see it. So that would be a high tension number. So this would be something that we would want to highlight as a tension number. Does that make sense? Okay? So that's where those last two pieces of color come in on this process. Now, when we come back, we're going to spend some time trying to figure out what are, we've got the data points, we've identified what they are in big picture, but then when we come back, we're going to take that color version and we're going to start breaking it apart and figuring out what does it mean and what can we do with it. Okay? So, how about we say, is 1:30 reasonable for to get someplace and back for lunch? Okay, great. Well, we'll be back here at 1:30 and we'll get going.